it was just became this different person. And she's thinking to herself, it's because of what he was exposed to inside. It was horrible. Goes back to be cleared 9 days later. 8 days later, he gets cleared. The 9th day, he has to go back to work. On his way to work, he kills himself. They find they don't look at his brain. This is years ago, and I didn't know Aaron, but they find an orbital fracture nowhere near the trajectory of a bullet, and they also find another skull fracture not in the trajectory of the
bullet. Hey folks, welcome to another edition of Broken Brains with your host, Bruce Parkman, the official podcast of the Mac Parkman Foundation, where we look at the issue of repetitive brain trauma from two aspects: repetitive ed impacts in contact sports, repetitive blast exposure from our military veterans, and what these repetitive conditions are doing to the brain health, mental wellness, and futures of our kids, athletes, and veterans. Why is this important? Because this is not trained in our nursing, medical, or psychological, or suicide prevention communities, meaning that this condition is usually misdiagnosed, mistreated, resulting in the largest preventable cause of mental illness in this country. And because it's not known, you become the first line of defense. So so we bring on the best guests we can find to give you that 360-degree view of this condition so you can make informed conditions. And again, another amazing guest. Hats off to our producer, Denny Caballero, who helps us find these amazing people. But I know this woman personally, and she is a force of nature. Let me tell you, Miss Stephanie Samuels is a psychotherapist dedicated to supporting law enforcement officers through the unique mental health challenges of their profession. As the founder of Copline, the first confidential national hotline for officers, and a leading voice on trauma, PTSD, and concussions in policing, she brings decades of experience to the conversation around emotional resilience and recovery. Stephanie's work bridges clinical insight with real-world understanding to help protect those who protect others. And we all know that our first responder community is one of the most under-resourced and underrepresented professions in the issue when it comes to the issue of mental health. And I cannot thank those that help them out. But Miss Samuels, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Totally my honor. Appreciate that. And Copline, happy to tell you, we are international. We are in Canada, and we are, as of this month, we are in Australia.
I love that place. I'm trying to get some more work. I used to own a company down there. I've got some other work going on there now, man. But good on you. So international. That's amazing, man. Because the proliferation of the awareness that you're bringing. And I want people to know how I met Stephanie. Is I was at the IACP this year, and I went up to an organization that had this common it was a blast exposure and a blast exposure and RHI assessment. And I'm like, where did you get this? Because I know a little bit about the space. It was the most comprehensive assessment I had ever seen in the 5 years that I've been forced, through the death of my son, to deal with brain injury and mental well-being. And I tracked Miss Samuels down, and we had a very, very deep discussion. And that thing is amazing. So, Stephanie, tell the audience the history. How'd you get started in this? Because this is one of my favorite stories, man. Tell everybody how you got in the biz.
Got from way back when, or
yeah,
working with cops.
Yeah. The story you told me about the ride-by, the drive-alongs that got you into there.
My ride-alongs. Yep. So I was getting my master's in clinical psych back in the 80s. I was on a plane. It was 80s were great. 80s were the gangs. I was out in California, and I was on a plane, and I was on my way back, and I was reading People magazine, which makes me a world expert on whatever is in People magazine, as we all know. So I was reading, and I had just finished an article on gangs, and there was a young woman sitting next to me in her teens, late teens, and she asked me if I knew anything about gangs. So I'm thinking to myself, shit, I'm a world expert right now. I just finished my article on Gangs and People magazine. So she then proceeded to tell me that that her boyfriend was in a gang. He was older, he was in his early 20s, and that he wanted to get out of a gang and that he needed help. Thinking to myself, I can help. My God, that should be easy. We'll just get this misguided youth out of there, and so be it. Well, did I get schooled fast? So anyway, so I started doing ride-alongs, and I ended up doing ride-along in with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, where I first learned what the word "stirpy" meant, as I signed away my life, and as I got into the back of the patrol car, and the officer, now nobody wants to ride. Like having a ride-along is just the biggest asset. Of course, I didn't know this at the time, and, so when they put you in the back of the car, I'm happy to announce I had not been in the back of a police car prior to this experience, and the officer said, "Just so you know, you cannot get out," and that gangs, the only thing that they really hate more than each other are police cars, so if we are being shot up, you're gonna have to figure out how to get out because we have to do our job. Myself, "Oh, so much for the welcome wagon." So, so that was kind of that was my introduction into ride-alongs and kind of what that world was. And it was fun. It was really fun. Um, and thought about whether or not I wanted to become a cop and kind of the adrenaline that went along with it. So ended up riding quite a bit with LAPD at the time, and there's a situation that had arisen. We had back then they had their gang detail unit was called Crash. I do not know the acronym that it was changed to because it needed to be softer and fuzzier, but it used to stand for California Residents Against Street Hoodlums. So that acronym went out the window. But they were plain clothed, and it was a specific gang detail unit. I rode with a sergeant, had ridden with him many times before. Um, totally platonic. I mean, this is not my way of Saturday night dating. You'll be happy to know. So had gone out, and in California they have brick walls, cinder block walls, and I remember we got a call, couldn't get backup with a plainclothed um, officer, had, is known gang member, and I remember, that the sergeant got out of the car and started running after this kid, and, yeah, before I signed my life away with, everybody at that point, ended up getting out of the car running, and you're just, you're young and dumb, first of all, there's no way in hell I was gonna end up, catching anybody. You'll be happy to know I always said, when it comes to races, I'm a completer, not a competer, so I knew he was getting away. But, as we got to the cinder block wall, the sergeant looked at me, and the eyes of the soul, and I'm looking at him, and I'm seeing fear. And his eyes are saying goodbye, and his eyes are saying, "I love you," but not in a creepy way, just that human being way of, "This is a moment," and I'll never forget his words, and he said, "I'm paid to jump that wall, and they know what's on the other side, and I don't." And then he said, "If there's an issue, you're gonna have to run back to the car and tell them where we are." And I just remember thinking to myself, like, that was a neutralizer for me. I just remember thinking to myself, this went from being really fun to like, holy shit, like you can die. And I remember thinking to myself, number one, could I jump the wall? Not physically, but psychologically. And number two, did I want to jump the wall? And that experience truly changed the trajectory of my life. And I will tell you, I think I would have made a shitty cop. Um, but I did know where my life would end up going. Ended up moving back east, had gotten engaged. Um, my then husband told me that he'd never marry a cop. Ended up working housing projects in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, more deaths on 6th and D than any other place. And I got schooled on the D. I learned a whole lot about respect. I mean, these were America's most wanted youth. And, the profile of a cop and a convict are similar. Somebody took a right-hand turn, somebody took a left-hand turn, or those that took the right-hand turn weren't caught doing the left-hand turn, and pulled it together and, but mad respect, truly mad respect. And, ended up in New Jersey. I went to the police academy. I started doing ride-alongs out here in Jersey and, asked who was doing their psych services, debriefings, officers involved in, you know, untimely deaths, critical incidents, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll never forget, they kind of looked at me like I had two heads. And I was like, okay. Came from California. I could be speaking LAEs, which is, a whole other language from another country. And I'm like, okay, rephrased it, officers that are involved in untimely deaths, blah, blah, blah. Kind of looked at me and he just said, no one. I thought to myself, my God, you know, and I had some amazing ride-alongs out here. Now, some of our departments are really small. They're six-man departments. LAPD in Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, really big departments. It is rare that they are patrolling the areas that they grew up in. And what I found to be so unique was these calls weren't John or Jane Doe. This was Aunt Susan's best friend, Sally, who I used to go over to after school, and she fed me while my mom was at work. That's who these calls are. So that kind of healthy inoculation that officers can have to distance themselves in these smaller departments, they didn't have it. So, everything was a potential for an emotionally charged call. And so as I rode with different departments and got to understand and, and when I'd get there, they'd say, how long are you riding for? And I'd be like, if the shift was 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, those are the three shifts. And I'm like, depending on how long the shift was, I'm like, oh, the whole shift. And I just watch the blood drain from their faces. Like, oh my God, particularly midnights, because a lot of them would coop. And I'm like, it's all good. It's all good. And so for the first 4 hours of the shift, they absolutely figured that I was planted there by either their internal affairs, uh, department or their chief. And by hour, you know, 4.5, they realized nobody had vetted me clearly, that I had one of those politically incorrect mouths and foul like a sailor. And so by 4.5 hours, I should have been in a collar. There was nothing these guys didn't talk about or tell me. So many emotions, such beautiful men and women, truly, truly beautiful men and women. And really ended up getting a good breadth and depth of what was going on, here. And, as a kid, I had, in high school, I had been part of a focus group, um, that we had a group at school where you kind of tutored and dealt with, people that, other kids your age that were struggling, a peer program. That's what it was. And one of the kids' moms was a psychologist and came up with the idea of having a hotline for teenagers to talk to other teenagers. So I became part of the first focus group. And it was called Teen Line Cares. Teen Line Care, it's now like 45 years later, like it's crazy. And is still very much alive and well and incredible. The founder of that just died at 93. I'm going to say 2 years ago, Elaine Leader.
Good
So I
Lord.
always used to tease her that she was the grandma of Copline. But it was an amazing thing to be involved with, and then to be able to go out, work with cops, and to realize truthfully that although I did great with them, I never wore that gun badge and patch. I would never be able to cross a barrier, and I never should be able to. I didn't earn that right. But being able to, so in private practice, I was retiring quite a few of my officers untimely from post-traumatic stress disorder. And they were literally leaving a job that they loved, an administration that they didn't necessarily. Um, but they were taking a wealth of knowledge with them and losing a camaraderie. And that camaraderie many times is an anchor to your world.
Mm.
So I thought to myself, well, I can do this. Like I did it as a teenager. Talked to the two leading people literally in the world at the time, Dr. Edwin Schneidman, who was the founder of the suicide Los Angeles Suicide Prevention Hotline. Dr. Schneidman, Dr. Farborough, and I forget the third one. So who's ever listening, I apologize. And that was the oldest hotline in the country. So I was able to I had Dr. Schneidman at UCLA. I had taken several of his courses. So, and then I was still very much in contact with Dr. Leader. So spoke to the two of them and said, this is what I would like to do, and this is why. And Dr. Schneidman was all excited. He just thought this was a brilliant idea. And of course, Dr. Leader was all for it. And that's really what gave me the courage and the strength to do it. I mean, it is just, um, I'm sure like yourself, when you throw yourself into something, you don't think about it. You just know that you have a passion and there's a need, and then you go forward. And that was truly, for me, what it was about. I ended up legislating a hotline here in New Jersey. Once legislation went through, there is a mission drift on that, and ended up going from there and forming Copline because I knew what needed to be done. Politics was not going to be part of it. Created a not-for-profit. The other piece was legislated. And as crazy as this sounds, I wanted to make sure with confidentiality that suicide was not going to be a breach. Officers are allowed to have the worst days of their lives without worrying about it costing them everything. And I also know that that people that call hotlines don't die by suicide, that the Los Angeles Suicide Prevention Hotline from 1963 to 2019 at the time, they had 7,500,000 suicidal calls and 2 people died on the lines.
Wow.
I know that cops won't call hotlines because they're scared to death. It will cost them their gun badge and patch.
Mm. Yep.
So I had done a really good job educating myself and knew what needed to be moved forward, and knew the training that needed to happen in order to do that, knew the stringent vetting that was going to have to take place. And, I waited like everybody else does for that perfect time to move forward with Copline when we had enough money, when everything was all lined up. It's like having children. If you wait for that moment, it's never coming. So my moment came when I had created Copline. It rang into my office, and now I would take you. So it was June, when the June of 2016, that the Pulse shooting happened. And I just remember thinking to myself, those poor officers that responded to Pulse. What a horrendous shit show that was. And so we had a carrier at the time, and I now said, okay, I bought a second phone, and then I was going to just have what my children grew up with a Copline phone. So there would be a second phone, and I wasn't going to advertise, so the chances of it ringing was going to be between slim and none. But at least that way I had an active line. It was still ringing into my office on July 7th of 2016, which was the Dallas 5. I had known at that point when I was in the office that the shooting had taken place, and I was with a patient, and I saw Dallas come up on my caller ID, and I thought I had to take it. So I took it, and it was a female. I assumed it was an officer, and she was screaming, and she was crying, and she said, "They're killing my brothers and sisters. I beg of you to do something. You have got to do something. They're killing my brothers and sisters." And I thought to myself, holy shit, like I have got to do something. At that point, went back to the carrier and said, I'll start from the CEO down. Lines were transferred on to another phone. I had called up Nancy Bowl out in California, who has the international counseling group team. And so she allowed her folks, she's wonderful. She allowed her folks to take 2 weeks on those lines. And after 2 weeks, she ripped the Band-Aid off and said, that's it. Now it's on you. And it was just, if you build it, they will come. So our first training, my first volunteer was we had somebody that through Nancy's organization was a retired cop who was also a clinician. So she has been answering the phones for us and still is to this day from then. And then we had a retired Fort Worth police officer who had started her peer support unit. And so she answered lines until we could do our first training, which was in April of 2017. And kind of the rest is history. I mean, 2019, we went into Canada and literally we trained our first Australian this in February to go down into Australia. So um, so that's kind of how that got started. But that didn't touch on yet where you and I ended up really connecting.
No, and I think, for the audience, if you could really, I mean, a lot of people are completely unaware of the trauma that first responders go through.
Mhm.
As a veteran, veterans get a lot of attention, right? We fight wars, whatever it is. But I'll tell you, our first responders are fighting an equally large, if not larger, war here back in the United States with much more, in certain times, significant trauma. Like when we go to war, 6 months, we're back home. But for 20 years, a police officer fights that war, and from a never-ending capacity. Can you talk to our audience a little bit about the trauma
Sure.
that you're dealing with, so that they can kind of enter the minds of a cop? Because way too far often we just blow these first responders off. They're just public servants. They're just doing a job, and when we fail to understand and appreciate the risk that we put them in, the trials that they endure, and the trauma that they face.
So yeah, thank you for bringing that up and for wanting me to address it. So and most of our cops, by the way, do 25 years. Um, it's actually longer, and in New Jersey now to get a full pension, which would be 70%, they have to go to 30 years. Actually, to get 65% now, they have to go to 30 years.
Wow,
So yeah,
did not know that.
it's a lot of it's a lot of time. Um, but what most people don't think about is the emotional toll that everything takes. So, you get the traffic ticket and, you're pissed off. Cops aren't there. When people call police, it's because something went wrong. They're not the heroes in this scenario typically. They're the ones that are there to break up the fights. They're the ones that are called in to figure out very quickly what's going on. They have 1/100th of a second to make a decision that is going to be reviewed for years if they have to use deadly force. And that decision to use deadly force is one of the highest emotional thresholds that an officer has. I have dealt with many, many shooters, and I will tell you, I have never met a single one of them that had woken up that morning and thought, I can't wait to try and kill somebody or to kill somebody. When you look at the 10 commandments, and I talk about this all the time, I'm not that religious, but I can tell you the two things I remember. Thou shalt not kill is always number one, and I'm not supposed to covet thy neighbor's wife. Those are the two big ones that stick out for me. I know I'm not supposed to steal. Those are my three. But other than that, the other seven are a little dicey. I'd have to really look. But thou shalt not kill, no matter how agnostic an officer is, it haunts them like nothing else. It is sacred. And the only justification for that shoot is that their life was imminently in danger. It is the justified of what justifies that shoot. So the understanding that they had to make a decision, and a lot of times it's not necessarily, and people don't think about this, it's not that they took the life. It is for them what would have happened if they didn't. So if you saw The Sixth Sense, do you remember the movie The Sixth Sense?
With Bruce
Or
Willis?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not until the end that you realize that he's not there, that that is an officer. They are literally going through all of these different moments, but thinking that I wouldn't be here. It's Scrooge looking through, it's the Ghost of Christmas Future
Yeah.
where Tiny Tim isn't there. That is what screws up a cop, is the
Huh.
reality that I wouldn't be at my daughter's recital today if I couldn't have taken that shot. I wouldn't be celebrating this. And it is a weight that few will ever understand. And they will also tell you that they have the mark of Cain, that if you go into a room is interesting. Many years ago, I was on an A&E special, and there is and they had done interviewed a couple of my shooters. And so they were filming behind me, and he was talking about the mark of Cain. And he looks at the guy, he looks right through me, goes over my head, and he goes, he knows exactly what I'm talking about because he's looking at me like I have the mark of Cain. He goes, I can feel it. I'm the shooter. And it was wild. And sure enough, the cameraman, I stopped him like, is it the case? He's like, yeah. So it's a heavy weight to carry. But most officers aren't involved in shootings, but they're sure involved in major motor vehicle accidents where they pull up to a scene and you've got a parent that's begging to save your child's life.
Hmm.
They go into an overdose where they're begging them to save them. Or the wife who's been married to her husband for 53 years is begging him to bring him back through CPR. How do you continuously do this? It's going into situations where you have to make a decision on a domestic and figure out very quickly who goes where. And domestics are one of the more lethal calls potentially for an officer to show up to.
Hmm.
It's just, we don't think about that. It's my guys in cyber. So, I thought about my sex abuse cases, right? Where they're working in the sex crimes units, except it's fucked up easier than it is working cyber. And I say that because in the sex abuse cases, they have the victim in front of them, and you're going after a perpetrator. You have some insight into who that person was. On cyber, you're watching the potential of a child being raped over and over again, and you have no idea where that is taking place because you're not going after the perpetrator, you're going after the downloaders. And you think to yourself, my God, what is going to happen to this child? Because it's being made in a foreign country. And we literally have under 100 officers around the world that are going after those that are making the videos. We got tons of people going after the downloaders. And the reality is, and I think about this, and I was just talking about this morning, and with one of my cops, and I equate it to the NFL as well. Is I was watching a show about the dark web, friggin' scary. And they said, we are to blame. Like, society is to blame because if we didn't watch it or download it, right? If there weren't people that wanted to see it, they wouldn't be making it because there'd be no place for it to go. If we didn't watch football, football wouldn't exist.
Yes, ma'am.
We become part of the problem without really knowing it sometimes. So that's, so those are just, that's touching the surface of
Just the
what an
surface.
officer, but truly just the absolute top of a scratch off. Yeah.
And as you talk about, watching, we're dealing with now with, on my corporate side, human and sexual trafficking, child trafficking, and And we're dealing with the people that have to investigate, that have to
Mhm,
watch that stuff in order to collect the
mhm,
evidence. And the mental health and suicide rates in that population are through the
mhm.
roof. And they do this because of that badge, of that gun, of that patch, and their dedication to stopping evil. And this, and it's and we don't talk about the price that's paid. And we don't talk about the impact on not just the officers either, their families, the caretakers, the
Oh
kids.
my God.
That they got the fact that they've got to bring that home every day. And so, that's and that's what I wanted the audience to understand, that this goes a lot deeper than looking at our officers and firefighters and first responders as people in uniform. As
So,
if you
I
start
mean,
digging into their jobs. Yeah, go ahead, man.
my cyber guys literally can't bathe their children. They don't look at their infants the same way. Going out, they typically don't let their kids have sleepovers. I mean, there's just so much. I mean, their wives, I mean, they start looking at everybody as a perpetrator because there really is no profile for a predator.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
many times, because unfortunately clergy is huge, is they lose God too. And that's tough.
Yeah, when you start losing that foundation, yeah, I can see that. Well, as you started getting into this, right? When
Mhm.
we how did you get into let's transition a little bit more to why, you're on this particular podcast. And number one, I mean,
Yeah.
I want to commend your dedication and your
Yeah.
perseverance in helping these officers because we all know they need help. Some of us know they need all the help they can get, and it's not just money anymore, right? It's there's a lot of going. We're just talking about mental illness right now is the number one concern of every police chief I talk to, and when it comes to his force, they want to know how to get ahead of it. Who's going to be the next guy, and we are working with some really cool mental health platforms out there, but there's a whole nother side of police work when it comes down to blast over pressure and
Yes,
repetitive
there is.
impacts that you have emerged as one of the leading advocates for. And we don't even associate this with being a cop. So why don't you talk to us about this whole
Mm,
other side
yeah.
of being a first responder and how it's impacting their brains and mental health?
So about 4 years ago, so you've got to understand. So, I've been in this space for a long time, have now created two hotlines, go to conferences, although I typically am not the person that mans a booth because I have an inappropriate mouth. So they appropriately
Eh,
asked me to stay home. I could be next to your booth, Bruce, but that's about it. But, um,
you could man our
yeah,
booth or woman our booth. I don't care.
um, but, uh, but, at the end of the day, like, you go to these conferences and they hear, "My god, you found a cop line," or whatever else. I really do, want you to know, to me, cop line is just a pay forward. It's the right thing to do, period. I don't answer the goddamn phones. I literally, created something that I'm not qualified to do. Brilliant, right? I just get everybody else to do it. I might do a whole lot of other things for it, but bottom line is, my whole life, I've gotten to do the light lift because 'cause I've never worn that gun badge and patch. For cop line as well, I'm still doing the damn light lift. I'm not answering those lines. So, I know that. Um, and I it will humble me for the rest of my life because I am humbled by what they do and the sacrifices they make.
Yes, ma'am.
But, when you go to these conferences and they're like, "Oh my god, you're the founder of cop line, blah, blah," I'm like, "We all suck." They're like, "Excuse me?" I'm like, "We all suck." Everybody's pumping out their chest, or, "I have this, this first responder thing. I have this." I'm like, "We haven't been able to touch a fucking suicide rate since we began this shit. How many billions of dollars over the years have been pumped in to organizations, and we still haven't been able to decrease suicide rates. You don't need to be a fucking genius to figure out we're missing something, right? Because we all can't be that stupid, right? There's very bright people that are doing something. So the answer is, what are we missing? So I ended up connecting with somebody from high school. I always tease when people are like, how did you end up meeting Edie? So we're in high school. We took no classes together because she went into a 6-year medical school because she was brilliant. And my father was trying to figure out whether or not I was going to be arrested or not. So it's like, oh, two differences there. Anyway, so she became a neurosurgeon. And my daughter was in the military and was looking at different careers post-military. And neurology, she loves brains. So I thought that this would be a great connection. So Edie had been looking at, she had talked about police, and I thought she was on the side of police having to do with concussions. I was like, this is fascinating. Like, I hadn't thought about that. And so when I spoke to her, what her organization was doing was dealing with domestic violence. And it was dealing with officers that were going into homes of victims of domestic violence. And what was happening was that officers were getting agitated dealing with a victim because they seemed to be withholding information. They seemed to be not articulating things well. There are a whole lot of that. And so she needed them, officers, to understand what it looks like when a person is concussed because they had been beaten or thrown against walls or strangled. So she was educating them. And I said, are any of these guys that you're working with thinking to themselves, holy shit, I get the same things? Because then you deal with kind of, the after effects of memory issues, concentration being off. I don't have to tell you. And she's like, yeah, absolutely, that the officers were saying, I'm seeing a lot of the same symptoms in myself. So that began what became a deeper dive and saying, oh my God, I think I've missed something here. And then having been at UCLA and having been there just about the era of Troy Aikman, and then watching the Cowboys and watching Troy, and then dealing with concussions, and then thinking about, by this time, a few years, I was 30 plus years in law enforcement, just dealing with cops who, fights, falls, trips, fights, all of that was there. Motor vehicle accidents, defensive tactics training, evac training, where I'm thinking to myself, holy shit, these guys are getting knocked around constantly. And then looked at blast over pressure stuff. 27% yeah, I think it's about 21% of all law enforcement were military. So, it's still statistically, it's a decent amount. So, and we learned so much from the NFL. We learned that the issue is going to be trainings much more so than game day. And that we are training our officers in blocks. And so when you go into the police academy, you go in for the defensive tactics block, which could be 5 days in a row or whatever. You go in for the firearms block, which can be, 5 days in a row. And as I became far more educated in understanding secondary impact syndrome, what happens when you have these repetitive head impacts, the reality that if I asked any of my officers if they had a concussion, that statistically speaking, they would say no. And if I asked them if they had ever gotten their bell rung or saw stars or shook their head to clear the cobwebs, almost all of them would say yes. Research then showed that 92% of all law enforcement had played contact sports. I'd never asked about contact sports. I'm seeing a
Nobody does.
43-year-old man who's involved in a shooting. Where the fuck am I going with, hey, I was wondering, when you were a kid, did you have to play contact sports? You'd be like, oh yeah, the therapist is batshit crazy. And it's, so I really needed to understand myself and really look at, in the deepest way humanly possible, what I had missed. And I will tell you, it is a heavy, heavy heart. I am one of those people, like many of us, that unfortunately doesn't show themselves the grace that I need to. But I have literally gone back and looked at 30 years worth of patients and said, who did I miss this on? And made a cold call to them saying, I know you haven't seen me in decades. I think I missed something. Did you play contact sports? I know what the stats are, but it's going to be higher because think about it. By the time they come into my office, they are already exhibiting some of what we look for in a brain injury: depression, anxiety, PTSD, impulsivity, sleep disturbances, substance abuse. Nobody has come into my practice to sit back to let me know that things are going really well. They had a fabulous childhood and they just wanted to pay me and say thank you for having picked this career. Not a single person thus far has done this, just so you know. I'd be awaiting, but it
Yeah.
ain't coming.
Yeah.
So, so when I started asking the question, so 87% of my practice had this really significant history. So 87% of my practice ended up being referred to a neurologist. So, and then, as I, there are no coincidences. I really do believe we end up in places we should be. I don't always
Mhm.
believe the circumstances that brought us there
Oh,
is what
yeah.
we should be, but we end up in the space we should be. And, and here I sit with an international hotline. I had been lecturing with Dr. Dan Savar from the Concussion, not the Concussion CTE Foundation. Um, I was blessed to have met them. After the Boston bombing, the marathon bombing, I was hired by Boston to head up there to their police department to be their clinical director. Did that for years, so still maintained. Had co-founded the leader program out of McLean. So I had kept those connections. They're just lifelong connections. So when my officers were in trouble, I would call Dr. Beth Murphy out of McLean and say, hey, who do I send this person to? And it's how I met Dr. Cantu. And then from Dr. Cantu, I met Dr. Dan Severe. So I became literally just emerged in this environment and knew that this was right. Nothing had ever felt so right to me in my life. There are a few times where my gut screams, and it has been screaming since understanding what repetitive head impacts looks like, but even more so doesn't look like. Because so many of those repetitive impacts are non-concussive hits that we've been able to see through Dr. Dan Severe's research when they put sensors in those helmets, that it's about the G-force hits and that they can sustain hundreds of G-force hits and have zero symptoms. And yet, let's say on the 320th hit, which is less G-force than the other 319, but that 320th one, where the G-force was less, is the first time that they experienced a symptom. So we know that they're still being concussed. We still know the brain is being injured, but it's not counting in any data that we're tracking. So when I realized that Copline has an international thumb on a law enforcement community, knowing damn well that what I saw in my private practice, I should be seeing internationally, because I'm not going to have an outlier population. I'm just not. And that if you have dialed 10 numbers, they're the same 10 numbers that somebody had to dial to get to me. So I know that they already are struggling with something that was enough to get them to call a hotline, which has got to be so damn scary. And so when they call up and they were dealing with depression, anxiety, PTSD, administrative issues, impulsivity, training our volunteers to ask questions not about concussions, but about whether or not they had played contact sports. And we've literally trained them to say, I know this is going to sound crazy, but bear with me. There's a method to my madness. Did you play contact sports? And being able to help them understand that, and then they go on and they ask about defensive tactics instructing. They ask about if they were in the military. They ask about if they were firearms instructors. They ask about all the SWAT teams. They ask about all those different pieces because they have been trained to deal with repetitive head impacts, the head impact and trauma, which would be the mild TBIs, and then the blast over pressure injuries. And again, we don't diagnose. It's just gathering the information to be able to say to somebody, hey, this is what we know. And there is help out there. And that it's not uncommon for us to get retired officers that are struggling because repetitive head impacts is going to be a longitudinal component, right? And so not going to be uncommon for us to start seeing some of the decompensation after they retire just because of aging.
You look at, a lot, the law enforcement seems to be a call for a lot of military veterans when they get out. And I've had another young lady on the call. She was a ketamine specialist who was talking about how, that adrenaline surge is also a part of the hunt, which is, could be related to the fight or flight mechanism and that, and it's just this whole lifeline of playing football, joining the army, then I don't want to do the same. I'm going to become a cop, right? It's just this continuous career of, high risk, high performance occupations that have, unprecedented impacts on the brains of these officers. And it's just, you never think about it until you start seeing them and where does it take place? And now you're in Australia and everything's a contact sport down there.
So
except cricket.
They're just awesome. But yes, I mean, and being able to train some of the Aussies when they came in, I such a wonderful group. But
Amazing people.
But for them to look at this and be like, oh my God, like, why isn't anybody talking about this? This makes sense. And really being able to navigate the emotional toll that these careers take. So the other piece of this that people don't realize is if I have a brain injury and now I'm exposed to a traumatic event, my brain is already spending a lot of energy just keeping me in the here and now. Now you add a traumatic event to that, there's not a whole lot left to be able to process that event. So being able to understand that it is so important to ask about prior incidents, particularly those repetitive head impacts, because if we know that they're dealing with probable PCS, post-concussion syndrome, we don't know, as you're aware, and your audience might not be, that CTE cannot be diagnosed in the living. We see symptoms, but I don't need to label it. I just need to see the symptoms. But I need to understand where those symptoms are coming from, because all too often I would sit back and say, "Oh my God, you were involved in a shooting. This is the most critical of incidents. Of course, emotionally you're struggling, and then that's where I'd hyper focus. But now I need to get the other background because I know somebody that's dealing with a brain injury is going to do particularly poorly and is going to take them longer to process this critical incident than those that don't have a brain injury. Navy SEALs die 2.5 times as often as other service members. They are the toughest motherfuckers. They are emotionally tough. They are physically tough. And yet, why is it? And people are saying, well, it's because, they see the worst of the worst. Bullshit. They're blowing up shit left and right. They do more training than anybody else. I guarantee you they weren't ballet dancers or playing golf growing up. So that we look at the cumulative effects and then the adrenaline pieces, and then they become SEALs and they continuously have to deal with brain injuries, many of which imaging does not show.
Well, I mean, that's the problem we have throughout special operations forces.
Yeah.
It's they just we and actually the whole military is ever since the war started, we've been given P for plenty, and so the suicide rate amongst Green Berets, Army Rangers, and Navy SEALs, it's untenable no matter what it is, right? And then
Of course.
it goes down, based on tankers, artillery people,
Yeah.
anybody's
Yeah.
exposed to that. And these
Yeah.
are the guys that are becoming cops, right? If you
Yeah.
if you're a cook in the Army, you're
Yeah.
usually probably not going to become a cop, right? You got these guys or the infantrymen, these
Yeah.
dudes, these girls and guys and girls,
Yeah.
right? Are
Yeah.
chasing the
Yep.
buzz. And so, yeah, but and then you never think about, there's very few cops that go in the military. It's usually the other way around. They go to the military or
Yeah.
they played ball. And they go,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So what led you to build that assessment? I mean, right now,
Yeah.
I think you're pretty much aware that they're having an NINDS conference on the traumatic encephalopathy syndrome protocols, which, we've been pushing hard to get, out there, right? I mean, so let me ask you a quick question. You talk about, all these severe statistics, if you got, a guy that's, had repetitive head impacts or repetitive blast exposure, now they see a traumatic event. How many people in the policing community from a therapeutic perspective, or how many people in the therapeutic industry at all, the psychological industry that treat cops are even aware that there's a connection between blast over pressure and our repetitive impact and the trauma and the poor showings of these police officers?
Few.
Uh,
A-
few.
a- and not going to make it worse is that those that are doing fitness for duties do not think that this is their lane to ask the questions in, which makes me insane. And that some of the research that's now being done on concussions in law enforcement are not including anything prior to the time they got on the job. How do you do that? It's like starting midlife.
No. Yeah.
And
They are.
so this is so it's difficult, and me keeping my mouth shut is even more difficult. So it's just I am frustrated, but I know that I have to continue to do what I do and get the word out there and get the right information out there so that people can get the right education. So the self-assessment came up, and don't forget, so when you're in the clinical world, to do like uh, real assessments, it takes years. It takes years and years and years because there has to be empirical data, has to be tried and true. So I knew I couldn't do, I'm not a researcher. So I
Right.
knew I couldn't do that. But what I did also know is there was so much information as a clinician I needed to have to do a proper intake to get my officers the proper help because it is killing me inside that I fucking miss this. It is killing me that my guys could sit there for years and I didn't know that they played football from the time they were 6 through fucking college.
In a police activity league or in a Roman Catholic Church league. But Stephanie, you can't blame yourself, right?
I
That's no,
get it.
yeah,
I
I got it.
get it. I
I'm the
get it.
father of a dead kid who was
I,
completely unaware that you
I,
can't play contact sports. It's what do we do now with this knowledge, right?
I,
What do we do now that we know? I
Now you
mean,
just answered the question on how the self-assessment got there. Because I didn't have years. I'm not a researcher. I don't have the money. It's not doing it. However, what I did know is as a clinician, I needed to be aware with the greatest depth I could get of what you did from the time you were fucking born until the second you walked into my office. Because with that information, I could potentially change the trajectory of your life. And that is what you hired me to do. And so that assessment is for each one of my patients. So it gets emailed to you personally. I'm sure you filled it out. And what they chose to do with it, many of them obviously have sent it to me, as well. But I have asked them to take it to their neurologist. I've asked them to take it to their general practitioners. I've asked them to take it to their psychiatrist. I've asked them to fill it out with their loved ones. I've asked them to take it to their loved ones because so many of the questions are answered in this self-assessment. Like, one of my cases, and his brain was donated. He passed away. It will be 1 year this month, next week. Um, that we knew there was something. He was a firefighter. Knew there was absolutely something. Um, and um, and there was, but it was just incredible watching him while he was alive. The damage that he did. And it started as an infant. The way his parents would stop him from crying is they would shake his crib violently. This is literally a man that grew up with shaken baby syndrome. And,
Wow.
dad would hit him in the head. I mean, there's just all of
Yeah.
these.
Tough love
So,
bullshit. Yeah.
yep. So the
Yeah.
damage that was done literally lasted a lifetime. And
Wow.
I'll never forget because his wife allowed me to be part of the entire process. I'd seen him for 15 years, Bruce. And so, when we got the results, and interestingly enough, he had pre-tau that was building up, but the
Mhm.
white matter, we saw it in the white matter, and he had several brain bleeds. I mean, it's just fascinating to see, what was there. And
It
so
doesn't have to
afterwards,
be CTE. I mean,
correct,
60%
correct,
of the people, that we did a study on did not have CT and all died from
right,
suicide, yet all had cognitive behavioral disorders, all
yep,
had critical damage done to their brains. So
yep.
CT
It,
is part of it, but it's,
it,
yeah, to your point.
it's
Yeah.
yep. I mean, and with blast over pressure, you see the interface astroglial scarring. So
Whole
there,
nother
there's
pathway. Yep.
yep. But what we're seeing is the same type of cognitive behavioral and emotional fallouts from
Yes, ma'am.
all of these different pieces.
Yep.
So I remember saying to the wife, hopefully this will bring you some peace, and she's like, I'm just fucking angry. And it's just like it
Yeah, you
literally
cannot
took
be
her.
anything but,
Let's yeah,
the problem that you are talking about and that we are working on collectively is so enormous right now from a veteran and first responder, child athletic. I mean, we're talking millions of people that nobody wants to even open up this box.
yeah,
Nobody
yep,
wants to know what you're talking about right now because it's not just cops. It's not just first responders. It
right.
goes way. This is just an underrepresented, it's a poorly resourced segment of our society that does an amazing job, but it's representative of a huge issue that nobody wants to touch, man. And if we go back and look at all the police officer suicides, and we start
Correct,
looking at what
correct.
happened before then, and why, and
So
where did this society, where did we let them down?
so
Not
so
just yeah.
there's a case that haunts me. It is Jeff Smith. Jeff Smith, his widow is Erin. It was the January 6th. It was the Capitol riots. He was a metropolitan police officer. Ends up going inside the Capitol, and in 5 hours, this is all done through body cams, by the way. There's a lawsuit. In 5 hours, he sustained 4 concussions, 2 with loss of consciousness. The last one was a metal pole that you watch come in, hit him in the head, and it's just, and you hear him on the body cam. So he goes to medical. Medical takes no imaging. Medical sends him home. I'm going to tell you that medical might have been overwhelmed. I don't give a shit. Then call in more people. He
Yeah.
gets sent home. Erin says literally overnight, his behavior changed. He no longer, like the dog was part of his world. Like he no longer wanted anything to do with kind of the dog. It was just became this different person. And she's thinking to herself, it's because of what he was exposed to inside. It was horrible. Goes back to be cleared 9 days later. 8 days later, he gets cleared. The 9th day, he has to go back to work. On his way to work, he kills himself. They find they don't look at his brain. This is, years ago, and I didn't know Aaron, but they find an orbital fracture nowhere near the trajectory of a bullet. And they also find another skull fracture not in the trajectory of the bullet. So he literally died from concussions, from secondary impact syndrome. And I said to Aaron, as shitty as this is, I said, I wish Jeff died that day, because then line of duty death would never be questioned. He had no
Yeah,
mental health issues. There's not a single mental health issue from prior to that.
and that's a whole nother issue that people do not aware of. It's like, even in the military, if you take your life in a parking lot outside Walmart, even though your damage was caused by military service, it's a line of duty no. Because there's no correlation, there's no education that suicide could have been attributed to damage of his brain. And then the men and women that take their lives, they get interred or they get cremated. Now they
Right.
can't, now there's no way to look up other than what we now know. And I want to push hard for this, man, is we need to start looking at their military service records, their police records, and we need to go back and rectify this where we can.
Yeah.
Can we fix it?
Yeah.
Can we bring it back? No. But
I
we
mean-
can at least try to make it right. Say, look,
Oh,
your husband
God.
wasn't crazy. He wasn't an alcoholic. It wasn't because he was Irish and it was St. Patty's goddamn day. It was because he had a damaged brain. He was medicating his pain and misery. And you need to be aware of that, Miss Wife or Mr. Husband,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, and we know that impulsivity, because I dealt with this with Ken too. I'm like, why is it when somebody with brain damage that their substance abuse is like on steroids? And he's like, we don't have that answer. We know that's the case, but we also know that people with brain injuries are far more impulsive, and the impulsivity also goes with substance use. So it's just it's so involved. I mean, Aaron's husband was considered line of duty death for a pension. However, his name isn't on the wall, because those that oversee the wall will not put a suicide on the wall in Washington at this juncture. And that's a whole other piece. And I do get that, but when it can be proven. So like Brent Simpson is our first officer that died by suicide, that we got the brain. He was out of Charlotte Mecklenburg, that ended up with CTE, that we showed CTE. And he had been a defensive tactics instructor for 7 years in Red Man suit.
Yeah, there you go. Range safety officers, man. I mean, they were starting to understand the military, just like the law enforcement. If you're a range safety officer, when everybody's shooting and you're there, they shoot once, you get 10 times the impact, right? And that's over and over again. Then you take them into the shoot house and all that. It contained blast exposure. It's even more pressure on the brain. Yeah, there's actually a movement right now, and I do agree with this, where they're looking at giving Purple Hearts to military veterans that have sustained, that have validated damage to their brain. I mean, what's the difference? You get blown up in the brain, you get shot in the arm. I mean, is there a difference?
Yeah.
And I think the case can be made that when that damage came from sustained combat operations and even training for combat operations,
Absolutely.
if it occurred in combat, there's a lot there. And I mean, there is a huge amount of this to unpack, and you are at the front end of it. And I cannot commend you enough, Stephanie, for what you're doing. I mean, this is amazing. I encourage everybody to take a look at your blast pressure and your blast overpressure and your RHI assessment. And I encourage a lot of clinics out there, because you're addressing the biggest problem with just so simple questions. You can, with a high probability, indicate that individual in front of you, their mental illness is not related just to childhood trauma or whatever you think they saw too many bodies in combat. There's a physiological cause for that. And so let's talk about that a little bit before we close. What's the hope out there when you find these men and women? Now, we know there's been all kinds of improvements in treatment. We got, psychedelics, stellate ganglion block, supplementation. Well, what is out there? Because if you're listening and you are a first responder, if you are a veteran or an athlete, and you have had these issues, repetitive added impact, you've had this exposure right? There is hope out there. We
Ah,
are their
totally.
lives are, brain health is being improved. Talk a little bit about what you know about this, Stephanie.
I'm somewhat limited. I'm not going to be an expert on that, but I will certainly tell you that what we're seeing is diet, exercise. So a modified Mediterranean diet seems to be um a important part of this. Sleep is number one. So if you haven't had a sleep study done, I encourage every single person to have a sleep study done. So important to be able to do that, because if you're not sleeping, everything else goes to shit. And particularly an injured brain, has to rest. So if you have sleep apnea and you're not able to get that deep sleep, you're going to continue to facilitate some of the underlying issues that are going on. So, different types of therapy. There's ocular therapy. How many times have my guys gotten up off of my couch and they've turned and they're so used to just being off balance or dizzy, and nobody's ever questioned it because they just figured maybe, I'm not drinking enough fluids. I'm not doing this. No, you have a goddamn brain injury. It's never been treated with ocular or vestibular, help. You know?
Yeah.
So finally being able to get proper diagnoses. Like I said, so many of my guys, I have neuropsychs done on almost every one of my patients. And I
Good for
tell
you.
them, go ahead and stick this. You do it yourself. You pay for it yourself. You go through insurance, whatever. Stick it in your safe. Because if 5 years or 10 years down the line on the job, something goes sideways and you go back for another neuropsych, you have a baseline and it becomes presumptive because the only thing you've done for the past 8 or 10 years is law enforcement. And we literally have something that's not subjective. It's not me saying, well, I believe blah, blah, blah. Here it is in black and white. Here are your tests that were done. So I'm a big fan of neuropsych evaluations. It
Good.
really
Yeah, get a
important
baseline.
get a baseline. No matter who you are, get a baseline and do
Yeah.
it yourself. I mean, there's so many different things. Cognitive behavioral therapy, as you said, have some of my guys ketamine and they're able to work. They're doing this while they're still active officers. You can't go back to work that day, but they're
No, you can't.
yeah. But
Been
but
there.
they have found relief to this. So, and I hate to use this, but I think that the best way to equate it is people don't die from CTE. It's like AIDS. They don't die from AIDS. You die from what happens when your immune system has been completely diminished, right? Autoimmune deficiency syndrome, AIDS. So, and CTE and other brain injuries, that's not what you're dying from. You're dying from the effects of it.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
if we can treat the effects, Frank Gifford lived until his 80s. He had CTE. Damn it, I want everybody to live as long as they can and feel as good as they can physically and psychologically. And if we can treat the symptoms as we go along, we'll be able to do it. We can't reverse it right now. But damn it, we didn't cure AIDS. We just stopped it
Mm-hmm.
from being able to kill them. And that works.
Well, Stephanie, there is a lot that we know that we can do to improve brain health, neuroplasticity, a lot of the treatments that are out there. And we encourage people to come talk to you, talk to the foundation. If you're struggling, there is hope. It's not the black box that you think it is right now. So please
Absolutely.
reach out. It's amazing what, these, and unfortunately, until we get them covered by insurance programs, we're going to have to go talk to foundations and we'll get you covered. If we have to go fundraise me for everybody that's got these problems, we're going to do it. Dang it. It's just the way it is. But Stephanie, as we close out, please tell us people what's next. What's going on in Stephanie Samuel's life? What's going on next? How do they find you? Talk about Copline, go ahead and
So,
just take 5 minutes and
oh,
talk about everything that's going on. Go
thank
ahead.
you. So if you are a active or retired police officer or a family member or a loved one of an officer, by all means, reach out to Copline, which is 1-800-COPLINE. It is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As for me, you can always reach me through director@copline.org. And again, it's director@copline.org, or through the website as well. I'm going out to lecture in Las Vegas at the FOP. I lecture on Sunday. I want to say it's the 29th. Guys, don't hold me to that, but I think it is, of March, with Dr. Beth Murphy. Beth is the chief of the trauma and emotional regulation groups out at McLean Hospital, from the LEADER program, and absolutely brilliant, um, and just a gift to the law enforcement community and the understanding of what goes on neurologically. So we'll be out there lecturing. I think I put in for another lecture. I have to tell you, pretty tired. What I'm hoping to do, and I know you and I have touched on this, I'm truly hoping to be able to do some type of documentary, to be able to get something out there, whether it be, fantasy hopes for anybody that could be listening that has any connections to Netflix or HBO, is to be able to do, a series where you follow several officers. And it's fascinating to be able to see kind of their lives at work, their lives at home, their backgrounds, kind of what they're struggling with. So many of my guys are also coaches for their kids
Mm.
in football, and watching, kind of this conflict internally, knowing that they're struggling themselves with TBIs, and yet, kind of what that looks like. And I think it'd be fascinating. I think it'd be a beautiful way of being able to get the word out there, that says, hey, this isn't just about our athletes. I look at law enforcement, and to me, they're just a different uniformed athlete. You know, Same thing with military. The NFL and the NHL now is getting tremendous, coverage on this, but certainly the NFL, this isn't just about players anymore. This is, as you said, with your son, and I have an officer that lost his son as well to suicide, and just unfortunately, there wasn't enough of his brain to be able to donate it, but he had played hockey for so many years. There's just so many that are there. Being able to really bring awareness and do it through the media. The media can be so powerful if
Can
done
be.
correctly. And so that's my hope. My hope is truly being able to get pieces in place, to get a documentary out there, on a major network, streaming network, so that the world can look at this and go, "Oh shit, we need to do something different."
It does. It does. And I cannot thank you enough, Stephanie. Let's talk about that. Let's see what we can do to put some pieces in place. I don't know a lot of people
Beautiful.
in that. And I know I do a lot of yelling and screaming. I'm doing my best like you. So
Yep.
let's keep the battle
Appreciate you.
going. Cannot thank you so much for what you're doing for our service members, what you're doing yourself. And I hope
Of course.
that, in time, this journey helps you heal and you find peace. And we're gonna invite you over to our summit here. Hope you want to come over and talk about repetitive
Would
brain
love it.
trauma here and cops
Would love it.
and get things going. And finally, I want to thank your daughter for her service. And
Thank you.
I
I
hope
appreciate
you,
that.
and enjoy it. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And we'll see you next time. And we definitely will be in touch. Folks,
Thank you.
another
Thank you for your time.
amazing, passionate episode, and why we need to support our first responders. These people are the most overlooked segment of our society when it comes to the sacrifice that they play. And I know as a veteran, the attention that we get, we need to give that same attention, if not more, to these people that fight wars every day up here and on our streets. So let's think about that. Remember, we got the summit coming up September 16th and 17th of this year. Free book on the website. Just rewrote it. It's a little bit thicker now. Okay, maybe 3 bags of popcorn or 6-pack of beer or something. Read this book. Become informed. You just heard how very few people are even aware that this situation exists. That's why you're on the podcast. Like us, subscribe us, and then remember we have the app on the Apple and Google store. It's the only app out there, Repetitive Head Impact, for information on it. Remember, your children only have one brain. So let's take care of it. Take care of that melon. It's everything. It's everything they become. And if we don't take care of that, we lose them. They lose their futures. They lose everything that God could intend them to be. So you take care of yourself. God bless you all. We'll see you the next time on Broken Brains. Take care.